Everyone, you get a lot to do this week. You have general conference, possibly a general conference review in class. You have Isaiah chapters 58 through 66, which has a lot of content in it. You also have 2 doctrinal mastery lessons this week. And with all of that, you might have the question, well, how do I get through all that there is to the most important things? I'm going to share 2 ideas, one specific to this week and one modeled this week, but really applied to any week of seminary. 2 ideas that can help you get to what's most important quickest. Idea number one way to get to what's important quickest is instead of starting in Isaiah 58 verse 1 and just reading your way through the verses, find some kind of unifying idea or question or frame of reference that you can use throughout that day and maybe throughout the week to identify meaningful truths. Let me give you an example. This one borrows a little bit from last week, but if you go to Isaiah 55, there's that great verse, verse 8, that says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord." I was studying that with students a couple of years ago, and I had a student that remarked, that kind of sounds like God has life hacks. Like he has ways of doing things that we don't know about, but if we knew about, it would make our lives go a lot better, which is exactly what the Lord is doing and what Isaiah is prophesying here in these final chapters of Isaiah. He is telling Israel, here's what you should learn from your experience. And at the core of all of that, the lesson is, you should do what the Lord wants you to do in the way the Lord wants you to do it, rather than doing things your own way. And so, with those students, we went on a little journey to find some life hacks, and we found a couple of fun ones. I will link this PowerPoint on this page. There's a lot more in it. I'm just going to show you a couple. But just some fun life hacks for ways to do things that are maybe a little non-traditional, but make life easier. This one my children love. It does actually work. You can pop the top off a strawberry by using a straw. Finding lost things in difficult places. Making circle meat work for you. This one I love. It avoids that nasty warm finger milk by trying to dip your cookie all the way in the milk. Best way to do an Oreo. And this one's extremely useful. You can get 3 pumps into a spread out little container where you might only be able to get 1 into a small one. Now, those are just a couple of ideas. But as we look at Isaiah 58, the Lord gives life hacks. In other words, he gives ways to do things that are better than the ways that we often can come up with on our own. For example, dealing with fasting in verses 3 through 5, the Lord points out to Israel that he calls it your fast. And he identifies what it is that they are doing in their fast. Then in verse 6, he transitions to what he says, the fast that I have chosen. And it's dramatically different from the fast that they have chosen. This is the Lord saying, here is a better way to do fasting, which would be a fabulous study with your students. And we'll get to in just a minute when we talk about doctrinal mastery. Similarly, in verses 13 and 14 and 58, he talks about the Sabbath day. Another great example of, here's the way that you seek your pleasure on my Sabbath day, but I would have you delight yourself in the day of the Lord. And so there's a discussion to be had there. He deals with inequality in chapters 59 through 61. I love verses 61 through 63. It's the Lord's life hack for how he deals with problems and inequalities. Not with sword and shield and war, as the Israelites might have expected, but with a servant who is sent to preach good tidings, bind up the brokenhearted, proclaim liberty, open the prison, and preach the acceptable year of the Lord, to give beauty for ashes and the oil of joy for mourning. That's not what the Israelites would have expected. And so maybe there's a discussion to be had there. What do we expect our experience with God to be? And what is he saying our experience actually will be? Now, you could take that frame and use that in just about any chapter. What do you find in this chapter that helps us understand the Lord's way for doing something, which is different than maybe our way for doing something? A second way that you can really get to the crux of something important is built into our curriculum, and it's using doctrinal mastery. Brother Chad Webb, our administrator, said a couple of years ago that doctrinal mastery is the way to innovate seminary. In other words, this is the way to take seminary to the next level and give your students an experience that transcends just their mind and gets to their heart, and most importantly, gets to their actual daily life. This doctrinal mastery supplemental lesson is linked on our homepage under Teaching Resources. There's a lesson for every doctrinal mastery reference, and each lesson has 3 components to it. First, it has a Know the Doctrine portion, which is a teaching idea to help students quickly learn the doctrines and principles associated with that reference. So for example, Isaiah 58, 6 through 7, here's a quick assessment to help students see what they already know about fasting, and then a great learning activity to help them learn the Lord's way of fasting and even the promised blessings that he gives. Then the second portion is the practice application portion, which is the most important part. Please do not get bogged down in the Know the Doctrine portion, which should probably take only about 10 minutes or so. Spend the bulk of your time on the practice application. What this is a way to take these doctrines and principles from the abstract or from the ideal and apply them to real life. And so each one comes with a scenario that you could read to students, or maybe you together with them could come up with some other scenarios. They might have scenarios that are actually relevant to their own life. Maybe one of them has a question about fasting or has had difficulty understanding it or explaining it to a friend. Spend some time applying that truth to real life situations. In students that have had doctrinal mastery experiences the way they're meant to be, this is their favorite portion because it allows them to ask questions and to wrestle with the doctrine in their own lives. The final portion is the memorize the reference and scripture phrase portion. This is the least important part of doctrinal mastery, but it is still important. We want them to remember what they've learned and be able to locate that doctrine in the scriptures for future reference. But please do not get hung up on memorization games and activities. The bulk of your doctrinal mastery time should be, and students will want it to be spent, applying that doctrine to real life situation. Those are just 2 ways of getting to the heart of what's really most important in a week. This week we have a leg up because we have 2 doctrinal mastery lessons, which means we have 2 examples of how to get really into what's most meaningful. Thank you so much for everything that you do, and God bless you this week.